you've heard a bit of mine before, but I've managed to untangle it somewhat. About 10 years ago, so not this last year, I was able to spend 3 hours in the archives at Truro in Cornwall, and I took my camera, and I'd already sorted out the stuff I could find on the index that I wanted and got them to get it out, and I just madly photographed things to sort later. And one of the things that I photographed, which I've told you about before, was a handwritten will by a fellow called Thomas Roberts. And the reason that I picked it up in the index was because he left some of his money to two people he called his dear cousins, who were in my husband's Richard's family. And I wanted to find out how they were related. And I also wanted to find out if he was a Quaker, so that this will could head towards this collection of Quaker wills. Anyway, this year, I got into looking at wills online, and I found he had a second will. And his second will was an official one. And well, I guess the first was official, but it was handwritten by him because I've managed to match the handwriting. But the second will left everything to his executor, who was his dear friend, but who turned out to be married to the sister of these other two women. And so then I thought I'd better have a look at he didn't mention a wife, but eventually I found him. I was scrolling through marriage records for Cornwall, and I found that he had married a woman called Grace Nancarrow, and that really rung bells because my husband's Richard's ancestor's second wife was Elizabeth Nancarrow. So then I started putting Nancarrow family together. And then I looked for Nancarrow wills. And what I found was what I think I've described to you before as a Quaker bramble bush, because everyone married every which way, and his executor was also related, not only by marriage, but by there being intermarriage with his family. Now, this document was in the archive in a collection of Stevens of Ashford Buddock letters and documents, a vast quantity. And there were several mentions of Richards in there, because there are at least 3 marriages between Stevens and Richardses. But anyway, I was still trying to sort out if this guy was actually a Quaker. His witnesses were Quaker. I didn't find him in any, I couldn't find him in any, I found his birth and he was baptized, so he was not born a Quaker. Then I found a mention, and then I found his marriage late in life to this woman, Grace Nancarrow, who also wasn't that young. And she was Quaker, and it was a Quaker wedding, and he was described as the son of Thomas and Elizabeth, and Thomas was a brewer. So then I went to the Mr. Google, and or should I say Mrs. Google, and I looked up brewers in Cornwall to see what I could find. And what I found was that his father was indeed a brewer, and he was indeed in the same town in Marazion as the Richards family, and that he had died in the 1790s, and his son had inherited the brewery. This was the man of the will, and he had not liked being a brewer, and he wanted to really get rid of it, and was having a little difficulty getting rid of it, and eventually I think went bankrupt, and then briefly disappeared from any documentation. But then I just happened, I was researching somebody else's death notices in a Quaker Cornish one, and I discovered that he was the grave maker in about three of them, and it was the same signature, so I knew it was the same person. So the poor old chap, he's bankrupt and he's digging or organising, burying Quakers, basically. And then after that, that was in the between 1805 and 1810, I think I saw him as or 1815, I saw him as the grave maker. And then he married Elizabeth Nancarrow, who had been a shopkeeper for a lot of her life. And I'm still digging into her, but I found that she was basically an orphan for most of her life. And I found her grandfather's will. And her grandfather's will left her enough money to, more than enough money to live on. And the reason I chased this, because I found a will for her, and she was leaving £300 to this person and £200 to that person, and all women. She was leaving money to women. It was really quite interesting, and I have to dig more deeply into it. So she left all her nieces and all sorts of people, I think we're probably all related, a lot of money. And I thought, where did she get all this money from? Because it wasn't from her husband, because he was still alive. And I'm sure that a small shopkeeper business was not going to bring big bickies, really. But it turned out that her grandfather had left a quarter of his money to her. And it was probably not an inconsiderable sum, since he paid a Richard's cousin for looking after her for a few years. And as well, he left her £10. He left his own son, and I think I've talked about this before, £1. He'd gone to America and obviously left this girl at home with the relatives. And his wife had died, so he had a new wife somewhere along there. And I think he possibly had more children, that I haven't researched them. So she was quite wealthy, really, but they then appear quite a lot on the Quaker. I managed to look up, and she was listed in the Annual Monitor, and her ancestors, I haven't determined whether but I think that her grandfather and grandmother were Quakers, because there's certainly Quaker records involving them, including death. And her own family, the children mainly died, except I think there must have been one that went to America with the parents. And meanwhile, I found that her mother was in fact a Richards, from a previous generation. And then there was also in that family, one of them married a Stevens, and that was where the Stevens connection was. And then one in the next generation married a Stevens as well. So I had thousands of connections in all different directions, from Nancarrow, Stevens, and Richards. And the connection, I think, that it was his wife for the cousin. I have not found a Roberts that's actually tied up with the family in any other way. So I think that was the connection. But it all just suddenly, with these wills, it just all suddenly came together. And I just and the other thing that I found that I'm tantalized by and could do nothing about is that she has left 10 years worth of diaries from 1821 to 1831 in the archives now in Redruth. And I would just love to lay my hands on those, because I think she was a good living Quaker woman. And I'd love to know what she wrote about. So if anyone's going to Redruth anytime soon, I'd love you to investigate her diaries. But that's probably me, I think. That Mr. Thomas Roberts was in fact married, must have become a Quaker. He didn't want to be a brewer anymore. It must have been sometime around there. They didn't say he was disowned when he went bankrupt, but then he became the grave maker. And then by the time he was married in 1818, he was obviously a Quaker again, but there are no written minutes that I can find. Now, I also found, and last night I couldn't find it on my computer because I think I took a screenshot of it, was a financial will from her that listed all the rents and where she was earning funds. I'll see if I can find it again because it would be an interesting thing to look at.
Oh.
But I'd come across it quite early, and I thought at the time I took a screenshot of it and then just passed on to something else because that wasn't what I was looking for. And I have to re-find that because I think that probably explains some of the money, but she certainly did quite well as compared with her father, who got £1. When I had COVID, I tried to write it all down, but my brain was had it, and I began rambling, and I thought, oh, this has got to be pruned to a page. But as I say, there are so many families, all these families involved in about each 3 different ways. So everyone's connected to each other, but not in a straightforward manner.